Hi, and welcome to question 5 of the 2023 paper 1 for the Leaving Cert ordinary level. So, as always, if you want a copy of the notes I'm working off, just send an email to shanetroy@gmail.com and like and subscribe to get access to more playlists. So, the first question here, we have a company is repairing a railway line, and as part of this work, it's laying new railway tracks. It says, a 10B question, so there's 7 for the attempt. It costs €12,000 to lay 240 meters of track. So if I write that out, okay, €12,000 is equal to 240 meters. Now, I don't know why that thing there is happening with the zero. Now, if we want to find out how much it costs to lay 1 meter, so I want to find out what 1 meter equals to. Well, the simplest way to do that algebraically is to divide 240 by itself, which I'm totally allowed to do because 240 divided by 240 will give me 1. Now, I'm incorrect if I don't do the same thing to the far side. Now, for simplicity, I can drop off the zeros. That's the same thing as 1200 over 24. I could simplify that further or just tap in the calculator and get it to do that way. But I'll leave it the way it is. It's just a number. Now, they're saying that that's how much it costs to lay 1 meter. Well, they're asking how much would it cost to lay 320. So the question then is, well, how do I convert 1 meter into 320? And I do it by multiplying by 320. Now, I can do that as long as I do that same operation to the far side. Now, on the right hand side, 1 by 320 is 320. Okay, but on the far side, this is where things get interesting. Now, we'll have to use the calculator, but that operation there should give you this answer here. Okay. Now, I didn't work it out, but 12,000 divided by 240 is 50. So 1 meter costs €50. So 320 meters costs 320 by 50, which is 16,000. Now that makes sense because it's a bigger number. We laid more track. It should cost more than 12,000. It does, so I have no reason to think I'm wrong. And that's the answer from the marking scheme. Okay. So then the next part, now they're actually testing the same thing here as they were in the last part. This is a 5C question. It would take 6 people 8 days. So if I said, well, 6P, okay, as people, equals 8 days. That's what they're telling me. To replace the tracks on a different part of the railway line. Work out how long it would take 4 people, so less people, okay, doing the same job. So it would take 4 people to replace these tracks working at the same speed. So if 6 people took 8 days, well, what would 1 person take? Same things before. If I divide the 6 by itself, which I'm allowed to do whatever I want, as long as I do it to both sides. So 6 divided by 6 is 1 person is equal to, now that's the same thing as 4 over 3 days. So it would take 1 person 4 out of 3 days to do it. Now, we know that we have, in this scenario, we have 4 people. So if I multiply this by 4, that would become 4 people. If I do it to one side, I have to do it to the other, which would be the same thing as what would be 16 over 3. If I'm multiplying a number by a fraction, we multiply by the top only. Now, that's the answer. So it's 4 people took 16 over 3 days, which if you worked it out would be like what, 5 and a third days. But you're totally okay to leave it. It doesn't ask you to leave it in a certain format. So leaving it there or as decimal is totally cool. But if you went decimal, you're going to end up with a repeating decimal. You're going to round it. So you're probably better off leaving it in fraction form to save having to round. Now, part B, again, the same kind of scenario here. We're going to use those same logic in algebra. It says 2 towns, A and B. So it's going to represent that, A to B, and they're 120 kilometers. So visualize that. It says a train travels from A to B at an average speed of 180 kilometers in 1 hour. So this distance of 120 is going to take less than an hour to travel. It says work out the time it takes the train to get from A to B and give your answer in hours as a fraction. So it's giving us some stipulations here. So we have, let's see now, if the speed is, well, I suppose you could do it this way, 180 kilometers equals 1 hour. Well, the question that I have is, well, what does 1 kilometer equal? So if I divide 180 by itself, that will give me 1. I'm okay to do that as long as I do it to both sides. So 1 kilometer is equal to 1/180th of an hour, which is just a number. Okay, but again, you can convert it to hours in decimal if you wanted. Now, we now know how long it takes to do 1 hour. We're concerned with 120, which was the distance from A and B. So if I multiply 120 by the 1, that will get me to 120 kilometers. And again, like I suppose all the parts so far in this question, if I'm doing that to one side, I have to do the same thing to everything on the far side. Now that's going to give you a number multiplied by a fraction. You multiply by the top only. That's 120 over 180 hours. Now you can simplify that. That is a fraction. Now it's not the simplest form. I could drop the zeros off or just look for a number that will divide evenly the top and bottom. 20 will do it. 20 into 120 goes 6 times. 20 into 180 goes 9 times. Actually, I can go again. 3 into 6 goes twice. 3 into 9 goes 3 times. So that's 2/3 of an hour, which is less than an hour. Like we know that 180 kilometers in 1 hour, well, 120 is less than that. So it should be less than an hour. That's that. Okay. Look at the same logic I'm applying in each question. In the past, I would have done this different ways in my head, but I was always partially unsuccessful, never really sure of what I was doing. But once I developed a strategy for doing it, it just made these kind of questions easier for my particular type of thinking. Now it says here on the way back from B to A, so it's the same distance. Okay, so A to B is the same thing as B to A, which is 120 kilometers. Okay, the train travels at an average speed of 220 kilometers per hour. This is work out the average speed of the train for the entire journey while it is traveling from A to B and then from B to A. Okay, so when it travels from B to A at 120, it also travels from A to B at 120. So straight away, the total distance, okay, is the 120 plus the 120 is equal to 240. Okay, I'm going to help myself out there by saying total distance. Now, in the speed, distance, time triangle, if I'm looking for the total time, I can rearrange this, okay, to find, actually, I'm looking for her. So I'm looking for the speed. So if I know the distance and I know the time, I can work out the speed. So I know the distance. I just need to worry about is the time. I have the answer done out here, so I'm going to use this. So the journey from A to B was at 180 kilometers per hour. It took 2/3 of an hour. So we know that from part 1. And if your answer from part 1 was incorrect, it would be accepted as fully correct, even if not actually the correct answer. So even if you didn't have something from part 1, any answer you declared, if you use it here, would be accepted as correct. Now, on the return journey from B to A, it's still 120 kilometers in terms of distance, okay? But the time it took is shorter. So we'll use the logic we applied in part 1. 220 kilometers is 1 hour. So 1 kilometer is, you're dividing the 220 by itself to get 1. If you do it to one side, you have to do the same thing to the other to get 1 over 220. So at this faster speed, it took 1/220th of an hour to travel 1 kilometer. Now we know it's 120 kilometers is the distance. So I multiply both sides by 120 and I get this fraction, 120 over 220, which when you simplify it down using the calculator or just by hand is the same thing as 6/11. So the return journey took 6/11 of an hour, a little over half an hour. Now it took 2/3 of an hour to get there, 6/11 of an hour to get back. I can use the fraction to do that addition, and I get, admittedly a weird number, 40 over 33, which is just a number. It just doesn't necessarily look like it. It's a fraction. So that's my time. So my total distance was 240. My time was 40 over 33. I've done that here in the speed distance formula. So I know the distance is 240. That's this here. The time was 40 over 33, and I'm dividing them. Now that calculation does look odd, but you have a calculator for a reason. Okay. If you put that through the calculator, it will understand the operation. Now, the reality of it is you should know how to do that. So if I did it by hand, 240 could be expressed as 240 over 1. Any number can be converted to a fraction by dividing by 1. And that's being divided by the 40 over 33. Now, the trick with dividing fractions is you take the bottom fraction and you turn it upside down and you multiply it by the top. Now, then you have to remember how to multiply two fractions, and it's top by top, bottom by bottom. So you'd end up with, what's that, 60, 70, 7,200 over 40, which must work out to be 198 kilometers per hour. That's a fairly convoluted question, especially for only 5 marks in the scheme of things. But always remember, you're aiming for the low partial, you're aiming for the attempt. So even using the answer or just finding out the distance would have definitely gotten you up to the low partial. So on any question, even if you're struggling, try get something on the page in order to get the attempt. And then sometimes getting that first thing on the page can help, lead to another part, another little step that can get you up to the mid partial. Sometimes you may have to leave the question and come back at the end of the exam, and you find that when you take a look at these kind of questions a second time, it just clicks with you. Okay, so it's always important to read back over the paper. So that's the end of question 5. If you want a copy of these notes, just send me an email at shanetroy@gmail.com. Like and subscribe to get access to more playlists. Okay, see you on question 6.